day and welcome to the Neurokrish Podcast, where we talk about matters of brain and mind, the brain and emotion, the brain and behavior, and other aspects that influence it, like spirituality and integrative health. I hope you enjoyed this series and I hope you learn from it. Please do interact with us. In this Epilepsy Day podcast, we're going to talk to a young person with epilepsy and how she has coped with her challenges. Epilepsy, as you know, is the tendency to have repeated seizures. Seizures are events which happen suddenly and which leave a person unconscious, often hurt or confused and disoriented. And they can be very frightening for the onlooker. For the person themselves, they don't remember what happened, and therefore they are not frightened by the experience, but they often left hurt or pained or in difficulty after the experience. Seizures occur without warning, and that's what makes them so difficult. Seizures also have a long association in our history with religion, with spirits, with witches, and as a consequence, they are very stigmatized in many cultures. So epilepsy as a condition comes with a lot of stigma. And very often a person with epilepsy struggles with how they can get ahead in life. Their families overprotect them. They often don't have the courage to go out and do things. And they often find it difficult to discover their own human potential. And this conversation today with Madhulika Sundaram is about how she has coped with her epilepsy, how she has drawn up her reserves of courage, and how she has identified her own potential as a human. Welcome to the Epilepsy Day podcast. Good day and welcome to the podcast on World Epilepsy Day. This is the Beyond Feeling podcast. Welcome, Madhulika. It's lovely to have you here.
Thank you, Doctor. Lovely to be here.
Great. Thank you for being with us. Why don't you start by telling us a little bit about yourself, where you live, what you're doing now, and what you're trained to do?
I am trained as a chef. I live in London now. I was a chef for 10 years till 2018. And then it just, after a point, I needed a change and it was quite intense. So now I was a chef in Chennai. Now I've moved to London and I'm currently training to be an artist and a cricketer.
Wow.
So big change, but really enjoying it. And I live alone in London in my own place and I'm fully settled here.
Right.
And doing much better.
And when you say artist, what kind of art is it that you're training in?
So I'm training in expressionism, expressionist art. So it's putting my feelings on canvas.
Wonderful.
Which is actually really helping me with my epilepsy. So I've been training in that and now hopefully I will have an exhibition later this year. So.
That's wonderful.
Thanks.
Now, you mentioned epilepsy and you've had epilepsy for many years. Tell us a little bit about your journey with epilepsy.
It's been a long journey. I think I got epilepsy around the time I was 14. And I get partial absence seizures. So when we discovered it, we started some medication. And at that time, I was going through a lot of emotional things. So it started building up. And from one partial seizure in few months, every 6 months, it started, they were more frequent. And then, so we kept increasing the medication to sort of bring a balance there. At that time, with my seizures, I also used to have a lot of face a lot of depression. I went through a lot of, but I didn't know that it was depression. I just thought it was exhaustion and just being frustrated with the seizures. So I tried going about my daily life and didn't really balance things too well. And then slowly, as they got worse, I did decide I was going to take a gap year after school because I just needed to figure out what I was going to do. I wanted to be a professional athlete as a child, but then with all this, it was derailed. And then I didn't know how to move forward. So I took a gap year, at which time I tried my hand at many things. And that's when I cooked for the first time, and the first time I painted anything. At which point I applied to both art school and culinary school. I went to art school and they said that I didn't have what it took to be an artist. And then the year after the foundation that I did in London, so I moved to London at that time to study. It was a very difficult year because I'd never lived alone, and I presumed that the depression was homesickness, but it wasn't really homesickness. It was more the anxiety and depression and fear of being alone. So I ended up spending 4 days out of in a week at a friend's house because I just couldn't be by myself. And then, so the first year was a struggle, but since I was in art school, it was a little lighter. So it was more just settling into studying here and living alone. The second year, when I went to culinary school, it was intense. I still spent 4 days at my family friend's house at very close. They're very close friends. But I managed to get through the course. I still don't know how. I think I just told myself that I was going to do this. And usually I'm quite headstrong that way. If I decide I'm going to do something, I have to do it. So I finished and then came back to India. I wanted to continue here, but I wasn't ready to live on my own and look after myself. So I came back. And then for 2 years, I was lost. I couldn't work in a professional kitchen. It was too difficult, intense, and the timings and just everything.
Also because of the epilepsy
it was all because of the epilepsy, because since I had the seizures every 2 weeks, by then it was every 2 weeks. So it had slowly from every month gotten worse and then built up. So when I was in culinary school, I pushed myself through. So if I felt the seizures were coming on a Wednesday and I had class on Thursday, I would push it till Thursday evening and then collapse for the next 3 days. Because I was just determined to finish that course. So then I'd just be low. But at that time, I would just be low and I could still eat. I could still do things. So because of that, when I came back, I couldn't handle a professional kitchen because of how intense it was. The hours, you can't take a break. And I wasn't ready for that kind of a commitment. And since I had just learned to cook, I would have had to start as a commie chef like everyone, which was too much for me. So I did a few internships, but they didn't seem to work. So then I was just catering out of home. After which the seizures, they continued, the partial seizures. Sometimes I would have 1, sometimes I'd have 10 every 2 weeks.
And just on that subject, you've talked about partial seizures where typically people are spaced out, but nothing happens to them like falling or injury.
Yeah.
But you've also had other experiences where you've hurt yourself.
Yes. So that was late. I can't remember if it started at that time, but I do remember that later on they started more. They were a little more. So they would get really bad only if I was emotionally drained. Physically, my body can take a lot more because of the sports growing up. So I can push myself physically really to the peak, to the limit. I didn't realize the medication was slowing me down. So when I couldn't work out or play a sport as well, I thought I was just losing it. So if I was emotionally exhausted and drained or something really traumatic happened, then I would have a full seizure. I can't really remember how many I had, because also since I was on a lot of medication for about 20 years, so my memory for those 20 years is quite vague and hazy. So I can't, but I do remember just once when I'd opened a restaurant. So when I closed the restaurant, I think just the trauma of all that and it was also a relief. So usually they come on when I'm relieved after a trauma. It's not during the trauma. So I was so relieved that I didn't have this. And that's when I had a full seizure, and then I fell and hit my face and lost my teeth and all that. And then again, I don't remember. It took some time, obviously, for me to get back on my feet. And that's when we also decided that I would come off the medication. Because
you would not take extra medication. You've always taken some medication, but you came off some extra medication at that time. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was on a lot at that time. I think I was taking around 2000 milligrams a day. And then since they weren't stopping and we realized we could see the clear connection between the emotional, we always knew it was an emotional trigger, but since we could see that, we thought we would try. Just so happened I lucked out because it was COVID time. So when I was coming off all these medicines, everyone were at home, so they could support me through it. And now I'm on 200. And so, yeah, so that was my journey till after the medication. And then I did have one or two more, I remember more recently, a year and a half ago in a restaurant here. And those kind of things are quite, I feel embarrassed after that. I know I shouldn't. I mean, there's no need, but I don't feel embarrassed for myself. I feel embarrassed for all the people I'm with. I feel like I've put them in an awkward position, because usually with the big ones, you scream and create a scene. So when it happens in restaurants, you really don't. So that way, I'm a bit worried when I go for a wedding into a church. I wonder, oh God, I hope I don't have one and start making noises or screaming. Those are just things that pop up, because you don't want to cause a scene.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just to talk a little bit about this, therefore, there's a very clear connection with depression and anxiety for you. Yeah. Stress is a trigger for having a seizure, but somehow manage to suppress it. But if you suppress it for too long, you end up with a full-blown seizure as well.
Yeah.
Does depression and anxiety ever follow the seizure? I mean, do you feel depressed or anxious after a seizure?
They are all connected. So finally, when I think when we figured it out earlier, I started taking, that's why there were so many medicines, because for the epilepsy, there was a set thing. But then because of all the depression and the anxiety, it just started getting worse. And OCD, I had at that time with all this a lot, so it would always be a day or two of my partial seizures, and then it would lead to anxiety, and then it would be depression. So usually when I'm depressed, I'm very happy because I know I'm getting better. So I usually am like, yay, depression has set in. So I see it like that. So when I'm depressed, I just tell myself, you're just low and you're going to be better in a day. And that's what keeps me going through it. And initially, when I moved here to London 2 years ago, when I went through the depression and anxiety, I had to go and stay with people. I couldn't be by myself. But now I just manage everything alone. And I'm doing much better being here. So
it's wonderful to hear that you've made this journey to independence, because that's something that affects a lot of people with epilepsy, the ability to be independent and the confidence to be independent and live alone. But you've been doing other things, I know, that have helped in this journey. you embrace certain other things which have been played a role. Please tell us a little bit about that.
So the things I do now, I've chosen to be a professional athlete and an artist because they're two things that really help me. So things that help me, the painting I only started painting last year. And since it's expressionism, I put all my feelings on. So it would be, if I went in on a day that I was depressed into the studio, my whole canvas would be black. And then as I paint, by the end of it, it's this shiny, happy painting because I've released everything. And there's been so initially I took photographs and I was quite amazed by how what the progress was. It would start gray and then it would end up bright blue or something. So painting is one. I make sure I go to the studio. I have a teacher who's a mentor. I go and see, make sure I go once a week at least. And I'm going to slowly, as I get better, start painting at home as well. The other is cricket. And I've always had a very healthy sort of lifestyle, worked out. And so the exercise, the diet. So I balance everything. So my diet is very strict, very balanced. But I have a system where I follow that diet 5 days a week. 5 days. It can be any 5 days. It doesn't have to be 5 days and twice a week I eat what I want. I enjoy myself. I go, and that really helps the healthy diet. So, and then I cook twice a week. I work at the soup kitchen around the corner. So I go there and cook twice a week, which makes me feel really good. And it helps me feel centered.
Yes.
So it's exercise, cricket, meeting people. I love hosting people at home and then keeping a nice house. So all those things really help. And just having a nice setup, inviting people, going out, meeting people, trying new food, just going for walks in the park. All that helps a lot.
And you also had a bit of a journey through natural healing that has played a role in all this.
Yeah. So when I came off it, I started naturopathy and I tried Ayurveda for a while. It wasn't for me. So naturopathy is the vitamins and everything as well as the diet. And since I started that, my energy levels, and when I came off the medication to 200 and started this, just the balance of everything, my memory has come back. It's much better. My energy levels have shot up. I just feel good. I sleep better. And the depression and anxiety have reduced because of the lifestyle and because of the drop in medication. I used to, due to the medication, find it difficult even remembering someone's name. I'd meet them the previous evening, next morning, I wouldn't know what their name were, So it was, yeah, so it's been a journey and an interesting one, which now I'm enjoying things.
And some positive outcomes as well, of course.
Yeah. And the seizures have reduced drastically with this. So, yeah, there's a huge improvement.
And of course, just to clarify for anyone who tunes in and listens, your change of medication, etc., has always been in discussion with doctors. It's not as if you've done things suo moto on your own.
No, it's always been a very, even when I was coming off the medication, it was monitored the entire time. It's not, and we took about over 6 months, I think, to come off that and slowly find the right place to stop. So even while coming off it, if there were times when I was not good at all, we wouldn't stick to that. We would extend it and say, let's give it another week before we take it down, or another 2 weeks. And we balanced it and did it with doctors monitoring it every step of the way. So
I think that's a very important message.
And I think at that time, I did have a lot more seizures, full fits and seizures, and it was a very difficult journey, but it was something I was determined to do. So and it is very important to have someone monitoring it, because otherwise you can't do something like that. Yeah.
But then, of course, what's also helped you is this journey of self-discovery and self-healing, which is also very important alongside, taking medication, following the instructions of doctors and things like that. People need to find things that help them be better.
And even when I was doing that, we did it discussing it with the doctor every step of the way. I didn't just move here when I was not in the right frame of mind or ready for it. The reason I'm so settled now, the first year was very difficult, but I knew that this was coming. If the same thing had happened immediately after college in 2010, there's no way I would have been able to. I would have moved back a year later and my mother would have had to be here with me the entire year. So I was ready. So we could take that call when I was ready.
So we're doing this on World Epilepsy Day. Is there a message you'd like to give other people with epilepsy?
I would say that epilepsy is not who you are. You define that. Don't let epilepsy be the definition of you.
That's a wonderful message. And thank you so much for taking the time today to be with us. And
Thank you for having me, Doctor.
Yeah, you've been very frank and eloquent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
So we're signing off on the Beyond Feeling podcast. We've been talking to Madhulika Sundaram about epilepsy and her journey of healing. Thank you.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed listening to this podcast. I think the most important message that Madhulika gives us is a message of hope that every one of us, no matter how difficult our circumstances are, can work our way through those circumstances and find our own human potential. In Madhulika's case, she has chosen to limit her medication. And here, as a doctor, my cautionary note is that medication for epilepsy is extremely important, and patients should not take their own decisions about medication. And I think she makes that clear, that she always worked with her doctors in taking medication. But it's also important to take the other message that one needs to do other things that heal. So psychological therapy was helpful to Madhulika. Things like Ayurveda and yoga and naturopathy found their place in her healing journey. And certainly identifying her human potential through being a chef, through painting, these things have helped her greatly. And I would think those lessons are as being very important for people with epilepsy, that we need to encourage them to discover their potential, to discover how they are intelligent, discover what it is that they can actually do better, and use that as part of the healing journey. And I hope in that way, this podcast is informative and helpful to each person on this important day, World Epilepsy Day. Thank you.